This is a big year for India. The world is keenly watching India play host to the 18th G20 Leaders Summit, and the Modi government has left no stone unturned to make it a big success. More than 200 meetings at 60 different locations across India in the past almost 1 year have led to the grand diplomatic spectacle that is all set to take place at the revamped and swanky Pragati Maidan in the national capital. Now, under its presidency, apart from the numerous meetings and cultural events that took place across the country, India began some very crucial new initiatives. For instance, a first-of-its-kind engagement group, the Startup 20, was started by India to push and nurture the startup ecosystem across the world. A new working group to encourage research in disaster risk reduction was also introduced. A conference on cyber security took place, keeping in view the digital threats of our times. Considering the fact that we are living in the Industry 4.0 revolution era. New focus areas of India's G20 presidency also included women-led development, counter narcotics, and traditional medicine. Remember, 2023 is being celebrated as International Year of Millet, and delegates from across the world savored multi-cuisine delicacies made by millets as they attended G20 meetings across 60 locations in India. Now, across the world, foreign media has also been keeping a close watch on India's G20 events and presidency and talking about it. The Global South and India's rise is one of the topics that they have been discussing and debating upon, and something on the lines of how India's rise as the one who rescripts globalization. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has termed the G20 summit as the global catalyst for a new world order. What does India aim to achieve through the G20? Will India be able to achieve its G20 goals, along with becoming a $5 trillion economy by 2047? And what are the challenges that might play spoil sport? I asked this to my guest tonight. I'm joined by Mr. Ashok Sajjanhar, former ambassador. Dr. Swasti Rao, Associate Fellow at MP-IDSA, also joins me. And Alok Bansal, Director, India Foundation, joins us tonight as well. Good evening and welcome on Mirror Now to all of you. Ambassador Sajjanhar, first to you. This G20 summit that is now taking place, the big diplomatic blockbuster that, India is hosting, has been a preparation of the last almost 1 year. We saw more than 200 meetings take place under India's G20 presidency across over 60 locations in the country. And we've set up priorities. We've given priorities like climate change, peace building. All of these have been part of the focus areas. Captain Bansal, I'll let my team check your audio. Continuing with my question to you, Mr. Sajjanhar, this has been a preparation and hard work of almost a year. How do you see India's G20 presidency, and what do you think India aims to achieve with this, considering the fact that we are conducting this presidency and holding this presidency in an era where significant geopolitical changes have taken place?
Well, thank you very much, Shreya. Thank you for having me on your show. You said that preparations for this have been going on for a year. I would say that it has been going on for much more than a year. Because, as the G20, the structure of work as it takes place, there is a troika that looks at all these activities. So India was also a part of the troika last year when Indonesia was at the helm of affairs. So India has been there dealing with all the issues. Now, I would tend to agree with what the British Prime Minister, Mr. Rishi Sunak, said today, that India is the right country at the right time. Because basically, if we see that, the world has been dealing with a large number of challenges both geopolitical as well as those geopolitical challenges have also given rise to a large number of economic challenges. And those economic challenges are particularly very deeply felt as far as the developing countries are concerned. So first we had the COVID-19, we saw the weaponization of the supply chains, then we had the Russia-Ukraine conflict, we saw the shortages of food, of fertilizer, of energy. We saw huge inflation in a large number of countries, particularly developing countries. And we saw increasing debt also. And in addition to that, if you look at India's track record, India has been able to deal quite effectively, quite well with COVID and also the after effect of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Now, India has emerged as the fifth largest, economy right now. I think I'm sort of stepping a little ahead of time. India should be becoming the third largest economy in another few years' time and becoming a $5 trillion economy also very, very soon. So India's track record has been good. The world has hopes. The world has expectations from India that dealing with all these challenges, India will be able to make a very significant contribution. Let me also add that just before all these challenges that have come, there have been other challenges that have been with us for some time. And those challenges are like the climate change, which is really the existential threat. The point I'm making is that there are huge challenges in the world, and India is ideally suited to deal with those challenges. It is not only India that feels that way, but the whole world also feels that way. So I think the manner in which India has taken up, you have spoken about the fact 200 meetings in 60 locations in the country, but India also, for the first time ever, invited the developing countries, had the Voice of the Global South summit in January this year to basically get their thoughts, their views, their anxieties, their aspirations, and put them at the negotiating table. So I think all these issues, whether of climate change, whether of relieving the debt stress of developing countries through reform of the multilateral development banks. And the final point I'll make is, as the Prime Minister has said in his article today morning, that we need to move away from a GDP-centric economic system to a human-centric economic system. And I think that is what the effort has been in terms of restoring the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and also the digital public infrastructure, making it available to the world, particularly to the developing world, so that climate change aspects can also be protected and the development, economic growth of developing countries can also be supported and promoted. Shreya.
Sure. The Prime Minister talked about that, Ambassador Sajjanhar. He also talked about how the G20 presidency this year has evolved, has been converted from an elite diplomatic event to a Jan Bhagidari, something that the External Affairs Minister also wrote about. Alok Bansal, how do you see this really from GDP-centric to a human-centric approach that the Prime Minister talks about? And how can India really take this forward now that we've come to the conclusion of this, almost conclusion of this year-long presidency, with the Leaders Summit now taking place just a few hours away from today?
The human-centric approach, India's whole effort has been in making it human-centric. We have been talking in terms of expanding the G20. We have supported African Union coming. Now, African Union comprises of some of the poorest nations of the globe. We are trying to take it. He's also talked about how anti-inflation measures in one country do not affect others. And in fact, to that extent, he has said that debt relief should be provided to some of these developing countries. And in fact, that's been one of his focus. So these are all human-centric approaches. Of course, climate change is another approach which is human-centric. He's also talked about cyber security, cooperation, collaboration. All these approaches, what Prime Minister Modi has done, I think the focus of G20 from here onwards, if the G20 expansion does take place, will shift from GDP-centric to human-centric. But more importantly, I think from India's point of view, we have never seen such a congregation of powerful leaders in our country ever in the past. I think this is historically the largest congregation of such powerful leaders in this country. And that is important. Prime Minister Modi also, by his personal example, as was being shown in your TV channels, has actually given a lot of emphasis on human-centric approach. If you have seen his conduct, the way he has been dealing with poorer sections of the society, some of this, the way he has provided respect to those people who are at the lower edge of the society, shows that we are focusing on human-centric. And I think at this juncture, when such a large congregation is coming, I think we'll be able to make some adjustment. I don't think so that it will immediately shift over from GDP-centric, because the very concept of G20 is the 20 largest economies coming together. So from that level, it will take some time. But the very fact that this conference is taking place in India, which is still a developing country, is important. And I think this shows a little shift from away from wealth to individuals that is actually taking place.
Okay, Dr. Swasti Rao, a clear agenda for India under its G20 presidency has been the fact that India presents and pushes forward the concerns and the priorities of the global South. India also has emerged as a voice of global South in the past few years, and with this G20 presidency, we've tried to do that. But at the same time, we also have the Russia-Ukraine war going on, and obviously the West would want to make that the focus, make that the center stage of this G20 summit. How do you see India really making her way through this kind of tussle between the West and the global South?
Right. A very good evening to you, Shreya, and a good evening to other panelists as well. So you asked me a specific question on how the West is going to sort of pressurize India, for example, on having the stand on Ukraine, etc., and how do you expect India to bridge this divide? So a quick answer first. I think there is a very realistic understanding that a joint declaration may not be possible, or if it is possible, it may not refer to Ukraine at all. I have been definitely following, what the Europeans and the Westerners have been saying, because I focus on that region. And, the European Union officials have actually not minced any words in saying that the current G20 joint declaration, the way it stands and the way it's been worded, it's not something which is up to their expectations. And they have already conveyed that to the Indian side. However, I think there is also a consensus in understanding that not having a joint declaration or not really referring to this should not really be looked upon as the success or the failure of the G20 per se, because like I said, that, there are also other geopolitical signaling, which are also happening alongside, which is that, China is not coming here. And there is definitely, I think, now understanding growing that with the BRICS expanding the way China probably always wanted it to expand, there is a sense from China to undermine the G20 by not attending the summit. Of course, there are the LAC problems happening with India as well, but then at a more global level, at a more international level, there is a signaling that China is trying to send across. Now, with that, I think the way I look at it is that especially with the West, I think there will be a consensus to try and engage more emerging economies of the global South. America has, Joe Biden has already clarified that. From the Europeans, also we see that, the Europeans also agree on getting the African Union into G20. So I think the way to look at this is to try and utilize from the West perspective, that's I'm saying, that try and utilize the absence of Xi Jinping in trying to posture itself and, posture itself as in the West, as the true developmental partner that the global south can have along with India, because India is also into a lot of triangular cooperation in third countries along with the West, when it comes to the global south. So I think I would expect that kind of a posturing, because I do not expect a consensus to emerge on anything with regard to Ukraine. Yeah, that's a fact, Shreya. Yeah.
Okay, which is interesting because I've always said this, that G20 is an interesting grouping. We've got the developed and the developing nations in this, and therefore it's as diverse a grouping as can be in a global representation, and therefore how do you bring consensus? But Ambassador Sajjanhar, then that point of coming out with a joint consensus on common challenges that we all face, how does one get through to that, and what kind of a role can India play as the G20 president?
Yeah, thank you very much, Shreya. And, I agree with you. I think it is a very unique organization. It's a very unique body, G20, because it straddles across East and West. It has the West and US. It has Russia and China. It also straddles across North and South, because all the developed countries are there, and a large number of developing countries, also emerging economies and developing countries. So it's a very unique system. And so far, till February 2022, I think there has been good cooperation amongst these countries on economic matters, financial matters, on growth issues, developmental issues. Right now, what your question is, how do we come to some sort of a consensus? I have spent all my life in diplomacy, and the first thing in diplomacy that we are told is you have to be an optimist. If you are not an optimist, you cannot be a diplomat. So I think I will start this whole thing on a note of optimism. Of course, I take it, what Mr. Lavrov has said when he comes, that if things are not to our liking, we are going to sort of, not going to agree to it. Exactly what Dr. Swasti Rao also mentioned about the Europeans have said, that it does not meet our expectations. Everyone will be drawing their red lines before they come here. The real conversation is going to commence, I think, would have commenced today. After all, the Sherpas have been meeting for the last 2-3 days. And then tomorrow will be the day on which, real deals are going to be struck. I think as far as the West is concerned, the whole thing has emerged into an 18 versus 2 scenario. Russia and China on one side and 18 other countries on the other side. And I think definitely the interest of particularly of these 18 would be that, we come to some sort of a text, particularly as far as the US and Europe is concerned. And this, I think, is a special agency as far as India is concerned, that we have, all these countries would want the Indian presidency to succeed. Because if Indian presidency does not succeed, I think in their view, it would be, a point to advantage China. And that is something that they would not like to have. Even as far as Russia is concerned, I think they would also want an Indian presidency to succeed. So we have a lot going for us, and we have been working very seriously, very assiduously on all substantive issues, particularly, whether it is climate change, whether it is debt, whether it is resilience of supply chains, trustworthiness of supply chains, etc., how to deal with inflation, MDBs, etc., all those. And I think, when we've had these meetings, if you would recall, of the development ministers in Varanasi, of the foreign ministers in Goa, we have been able to get a clear text on all issues, on substantive issues, except on the Ukraine issue. So I think here there might be a few things that you need to, dot the I's and cross the T's. And those sort of things on the substantive issues we will need to do. But even on the Ukraine issue, I think a lot of work will need to be done tonight, tomorrow, during the day, and tomorrow night. And I'm hopeful, the body language that I have seen of some of our negotiators and some of the others would lead me to suggest, I'm not privy to the exact formulations and wordings, but would lead me to believe that we will be inching towards a successful resolution. Whether it meets the full expectations of all, I definitely not. I think, the final text has to be one which makes all parties equally unhappy. If there is one unhappy and other happy parties, that will not fly. All of them have to be equally unhappy, and that is what is the test of the right, negotiated decision, negotiated declaration. So on that basis, Shreya, I am reasonably hopeful, cautiously optimistic that we'll be able to come to some
Very
such an agreement.
interestingly put out, Ambassador Sajjanhar, very interestingly put out, perfection doesn't exist, and if it has to exist, everybody has to be perfectly unhappy with the joint declaration that does come out if it does. But Captain Bansal, one of the key issues in the post-pandemic era has been the recovery of the economies around the world, the bouncing back of the economies, whether it's debt restructuring or the rising inflationary pressures. These are issues that the G20 member nations have to deal with. They have been dealing with. But in terms of, the Leaders' Summit now happening here, what do you expect from that, in that concern that countries have, and how can India really help in this?
Before I answer that, Shreya, I just wanted to make one statement on the previous question that you'd asked, that Russia-Ukraine. As I said, Ambassador Sajjanhar, being a former diplomat, is justified in being optimistic. But after the latest statements that have come from Russian Foreign Minister, it will be really nothing short of a miracle if we can get a joint statement which is actually given by all the countries on Russia-Ukraine issue. And it is not going to be 18 versus 2. I think that's too simplistic a statement to say. There are other countries whose views we are still not sure of. Countries like Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Turkey, Brazil, Indonesia, whether they would completely back the European resolution on Ukraine or issues like that. So as far as economic recovery is concerned, I think India has a very, very important role to play, because India is the fastest growing large economy. And the large economies which are growing fairly robustly are countries like India, Saudi Arabia. And they would have a major say, because this is at a time when China's economy is actually crumbling, and probably that is what has led to Xi Jinping not attending this particular conference and sending Li Qiang to substitute for him. But Prime Minister Modi has been saying this issue, as I said in my opening statement as well, that there is a need for debt restructuring. There is also a need for taking steps to control inflation. In fact, anti-inflationary measures taken by one country, he made one statement, do not affect other countries. And that's been observed very clearly. So that is also part of the human-centric approach, because controlling inflation is very, very important. Just growth while the inflation continues actually bites the lowest strata of the society, while probably not affecting the rich. And you can show notional growth. So I think India in this, on this aspect may get greater support, though I think the developed countries will not be willing to agree completely as far as debt restructuring plans are there. But I'm sure certain amount of a certain modification, certain way forward can emerge from this conference. And I think that's one area where I think there can be a greater congruence than more complex issues like Russia-Ukraine war.
Dr. Swasti Rao, in all of this, perhaps the situation in Afghanistan has been forgotten, is not talked about as much as it was in when it actually happened. Do you expect some sort of statement or some sort of talks directed towards the humanitarian crisis that has panned out in Afghanistan? India, on its part, has sent out aid to the people of Afghanistan. We also, that time had Operation Devi Shakti. After that, we have been helping out the people there. But do you see anything on those lines happening at the summit?
Well, Shreya, to be honest, I have not really seen anything directly related with Afghanistan when it comes to G20, apart from the fact that definitely Afghanistan comprises of our security complex, as in the security complex that we have in our neighborhood. And I think that is an area that is more directly targeted at platforms like the SCO, for instance. But however, since you mentioned Operation Devi Shakti, I think one has to somewhere understand the link that it is India's stellar performance when it comes to disaster relief and risk reduction that has actually led to a G20 working group on disaster risk reduction. I think something you mentioned when you started out the show today as well. So I think that is something which India can really sort of boast of, that India's evacuation so to say programs, whether it's Afghanistan or whether it's Ukraine or whether it was earlier in Yemen, they've been very, very stellar. And I think India is very ideally placed to actually create a G20 DRR working group, which aims to integrate risk reduction measures into public and private sector investment decisions. So I think if you go into the length and breadth of how this particular working group has been aimed, I'm sure that the experience that was gained at Afghanistan definitely plays into it. But as far as direct, so to say, mentions of Afghanistan in terms of G20 is concerned, I'm afraid that I've not really seen any. If anybody else has seen that, they are, free to correct me. But like I said, that I think it's better to sort of look at it in terms of the larger approach that India is now developing, right? And I think all of this is really playing a huge role there. The other thing that I'd like to say is that since we've been mentioning and we've been talking about whether or not there'll be a joint declaration or not, etc., I think one of the things that we are not really talking about is this whole host of extremely important bilateral meetings also that are happening. I mean, you may have noticed that just an hour before we started our program, India has already declared reducing, this duty on several of American products, and all of that is happening. So that's one bilateral summit, which is a very important one, and we would perhaps look at more developments coming, on the already concluded deal. Similarly, we would have one with the French President Macron. We would have perhaps one with the Japanese President Kishida, and then of course with the European leaders as well, because I think this is also a time when both the European presidents are coming for the summit. Ursula von der Leyen, who is the EU Commission chief, as well as the Council of the Europe chief, who's Michael. So I think those are also things that we should keep in mind when we are talking about the entire expanse of the G20, along with its specialized meetings, the other bilaterals meeting that are happening there. So I think that is something that I'd like to sort of remind everybody of.
Okay, absolutely. In fact, the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, the chief, has already reached India a short while back. And of course, we have leaders coming in from across the world. Ambassador Sajjanhar, like we talked about, that a lot of focus would be on what the West wants to push and what the Global South wants to push. And like Dr. Rao mentioned, that there is an important bilateral being held tomorrow, which is between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Joe Biden. And in it, of course, both India and US are looking at a lot of gains with this partnership with the United States. Do you think India would safely and would sort of by her own choice pave her way through the kind of agenda that the West might want to push? Because we know that the US is also reaching out to its allies to sort of counter the Russia-China bloc. Would India want to be part of that? And if not, how can India really pave her way through that?
Shreya, the way I look at it is that India's foreign policy today is not of aligning with one group or the other. Our policy is one of multi-alignment. We are the ones, like I said right at the beginning, we are the one that bridge, India bridges a large number of divides. And some of these quotes that you are showing in your program, that is what Antonio Guterres has also said, that India is one country that is able to bridge the East-West divide and the North-South divide. So I think that is the unique advantage. You are showing it now, that it is able to overcome the geopolitical divide. So, this is the unique advantage that India enjoys at the moment. And that is why even, when Rishi Sunak says the right country at the right time, it is because of that. It is not only the fact that India is fifth largest economy, the fastest growing major economy in the world, 7.8% we had in the last quarter, our GDP growth, etc. Or IMF chief says that, India is the only bright spot in an otherwise gloomy environment. It is not only for its economic advantages, benefits, and achievements, but also because it straddles across many divides. And that is what its unique advantage is. I don't think any other country, East or West, North or South, can be said to have that advantage. In fact, even in Bali, if we were able to come to the final declaration, it was courtesy Prime Minister Modi's statement to President Putin in Samarkand in September 22, that this is not an era of war. So I think India has those advantages. If you permit me for half a minute to respond to what Mr. Alok Bansal had said, after this, the Russian foreign minister's statement about drawing a red line, I think we also need to see it in the context of images that have come out today from Jakarta of both Dr. Jaishankar and Lavrov. There is a huge comfort level. Both of them are smiling and they seem to be in their comfort level. So I think there is rapport and understanding. The second point, I agree that there are at the granular level, there would be many differences between different countries and India. But the point I was making is look at the development ministers meeting. Barring the issue of Russia and Ukraine, where Dr. Jaishankar identified the two countries, Russia and China, who were against those two paragraphs, all the other 18 countries are in support of those particular paragraphs. So in that sense, when we are talking about getting a consensus document out of this the summit, then I think there is a language, there is a formulation which is by and large acceptable to 18 countries, except to two countries. And then I think we need to see what I heard from some of the interlocutors, from some of the negotiators, was that out of paragraph 3 and 4, we had by and large got consensus on paragraph 4. So I think only on one paragraph 3, we have still some outstanding issues. So let us see if we are able to come to that. I don't think we are very far away from the D-Day. So that should also become clear to us pretty soon. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. With that, I'm going to take closing comments from all my panelists. Quickly, briefly, the top 3 big expectations that you have from the G20 summit. Alok Bansal, I'll start with you.
This G20 summit, to my mind, will reshape the agenda of, as Prime Minister said, from GDP-centric to human-centric. And I think to this extent, I would just like to take your point, which you said, ideally G20 should make some statement on Afghanistan, because there's a huge section of population which the global community has confined just to the vultures who are actually ruling over Afghanistan. So some amount of statement for the women of Afghanistan is absolutely essential. I think if we can come up with a joint statement, it will be a big, big achievement. India will try to mediate, as Ambassador Sajjanhar said, between different blocs. India does not align itself as part of one bloc. And I think it will establish India as a power to reckon with in the global scenario. I think these will be the 3 important takeaways from G20 as far as I'm concerned.
Dr. Swasti Rao, your top 3 expectations from the G20 summit.
Well, apart from what the other two gentlemen have already said, I think my first expectation would be from the finance tracks, particularly, especially when it comes to the debt service suspension initiative that was taken earlier, the DSSI. And I would expect a more, some continuation in the G20 sustainable finance roadmap. I would look forward to having some sort of a solution to the tax challenges arising from the digitalization of the economy, because I feel that these are the core agendas for which the G20 was actually put into practice. So I would expect, some sort of a development and some sort of a tangible development on these very crucial issues. Number one, that makes the global economy more resilient and safer. Number one. Number two, I would expect, something on definitely on climate, because this is also something which is a major, point of divide between the East and the West. So I would expect India to sort of try and do something when it comes to climate financing. That's the other thing. And the third thing would be, I think there would be a lot of discussion and debate on trying to get more global South into the G20 and African Union. So my big bet would be on the African Union, because I see that for the first time, they are also supported not just by India, who's heading the G20 presidency, but also by the formidable actors, which is, the US and the European Union, along with the member states. So I think these would be my three topmost expectations.
All right, and Ambassador Sajjanhar, it's India's big moment. What do you expect from the G20 summit?
Yeah, I think on top, I will also put the membership of the African Union being there. Second, I would have some results on climate change issues, particularly as far as the climate finance is concerned and transfer of technology, because if you look at the Prime Minister's message today, the article today, I think there is so much of reference to climate change. So I think that is something, and particularly the call that he had given in Glasgow in COP26 on life, the lifestyle for mission for environment. So, that is something that I would definitely want. There would be some sort of, in terms of the way the multilateral development banks, that would be the second part, the multilateral development banks, there would be something that would be happening. And the last, but definitely not the least, a very significant one, in terms of acceptance of the digital public infrastructure, the DPI, because that is, helps to, in terms of the climate change, in terms of improving the standard of living of the people in developing countries. So I think I would put these three elements on the top of my list for being reflected in the final declaration. Shreya.
All right, so lots on the agenda, lots on the priorities. Let's see which one is taken up when and how. But for now, thank you very much to all my panelists, Dr. Swasti Rao, Ambassador Sajjanhar, and Captain Alok Bansal. Thank you very much for joining us on Mirror Now and sharing your perspective on this big blockbuster of an event that is expected over the weekend in India. With that, we're heading into a short break. News and updates will continue on the other side.